All right. We're going to just read a little bit about his business life. Roland Hazard served on the Rhode Island State Senate. He was known as Roland Hazard III. He was primarily a businessman throughout his career. His father and family owned the Peacedale Manufacturing Company until its sale to M.T. Stevens and Son in 1918. He was also involved in the Solvay Process Company and the Cement Solvay Company. Later became the owner of Allied Chemical and Dye Corporation. It later, most recently, and I'm going to summarize here, merged with the Honeywell Corporation. And if I were to list all the many things, it would take up almost the entire meeting to list this man's career. Now, as you probably know, the Honeywell Corporation is a multi-billion-dollar corporation today. Roland Hazard was never going to face a day without plenty of money. Not only was he going to have all the money he needed throughout his lifetime, generations and cousins and so forth in that family are multimillionaires to this day. Now, what's significant about that? We're going to read a little bit about Roland Hazard in just a second. And we're going to find a little bit more about how he played a role in Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you'll join me on page 26 of the book entitled Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to read a little bit about that. On page 26, it begins by saying, a certain American businessman, and we are talking about Roland Hazard here, had ability, good sense, and high character. For years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrist. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself under the care of the celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Jung, who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So he returned to the doctor, or to this doctor, whom he admired, and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. In the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society and would have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. That was the great physician's opinion. But this man still lives and is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on earth where other free men may go without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed in on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are a phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods which I have employed are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected, after all, he was a good church member. His hope, however, was destroyed by the doctors telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case, they did not spell the necessary, vital, spiritual experience. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. As I mentioned a moment ago about Rowland Hazard, one of the wealthiest men in the United States. I mean, he's a senator, too. I mean, he can go anywhere in the world. He's talked to all the best American psychiatrists. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what a psychiatrist is, it's somebody that has a MD, a medical doctor, that also has an enormous amount of psychological training on top of that. A psychiatrist is somebody who knows medicine and psychology. He's went to the best because he can afford that. He lives in New York and Vermont, all those fancy houses and everything he has. And he's going to various places, taking time and treatment with the best in the country. That's not working. So he finally gets at a point that he says, I'll go to the best in the world. Dr. Carl Gustav Jung. Jung is to psychology and psychiatry in the same brackets as the great men, kind of like what Einstein or Feynman would be to physics. He's certainly at the top ranks. To this day, we have many of our psychological and psychiatric evaluations that are based on what Jung discovered back in the days that he was practicing. So he goes to Dr. Jung and he stays 1 year in treatment. He's actually in a facility. Dr. Jung is working with him on an ongoing basis. I don't know whether it's daily or every couple of days, but I'm sure it's pretty regularly, just like anybody's physician would keep an eye on them. If you'll notice, Rowland is feeling unusually confident. It tells us that he was skeptical in the beginning because he'd been to all those other psychiatrists. But now he's like, well, I've been to the best. I've been here a year. I haven't had a drink. I haven't had a drug in a year. In fact, he goes on to say that he thinks that relapse is unthinkable. You pause and look at that word. It's unthinkable. He's leaving the facility, and it's unthinkable that he's going to relapse. He gets on the train to head to France, where he's going to catch another train to head out to the boat, come back to America. Now, it's said that somewhere very early, he has a relapse. Many people say that happened on his train to France. We don't know the exact minute, but we know he had a relapse within a very short period of leaving the doctor's care after being sober for a year.
I mean, he obviously didn't make the boat.
He didn't make the boat. I don't believe that happened. So he returns to the doctor. He says, hey, what's going on here, man? I've come to the best doctor in the world. I want to be free of alcoholism. And the doctor says, in my opinion, you're utterly what? Hopeless. Hopeless. You're utterly hopeless. If you put yourself in Rowland's shoes, that's a pretty sad place right there. That all the money and everything that it can buy looks like you're going to die an alcoholic death. You're going to either have to hire a bodyguard or incarcerate yourself, basically. So that's making a couple of points here. And, you know, I don't mean to belabor these points, but it's making a couple of points that if you have money and you're an alcoholic, you're going to be just as unhappy as if you were broke, and maybe worse. Because you really have something to live for, and you can't figure out why you can't function without getting up in the morning to do a shot of dope or taking a drink. And, you know, we all know that money's real fun for a couple of months, right? I mean, I'm sure all of you have had, you know, a pretty good supply at some point. But at some point, it runs out. And I don't care how wild you get with money. The happiness, the fun, the ability to blot out our miserable existence runs out. Well, it sounds like where Roland was at. His ability to blot out that miserable existence that he's living is just gone. Well, it also tells us that the doctor says, I've never seen one single case recover. In the great physician's opinion and his observation, people like you don't recover. He was asked, though, by Roland Hazard, is there no exception? The doctor said, yes, there are. There are exceptions to cases such as yours. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. Where did he get that information?
William D.C. so forth. Variety of those.
He did get some of the information from William James.
Yeah, wait.
But also from Professor Starbug and the medical journals that were kept at the time. It was so rare for an alcoholic or drug addict to get sober at the time if a doctor observed this happening that it would make news, and they would document this case of a real drug addict that sobered up, and it would be put in the medical journals. It would be put in the psychological journals. Some of those cases, and I've read quite a few of them, were like Jerry McCauley, S.H. Hadley. But it was so rare that an alcoholic would sober up that they immediately became somewhat famous. Wow, you're an alcoholic that sobered up. How did that happen? So never before in the history of humankind did we see a real alcoholic sober up other than just once in a while here and there. Well, Dr. Jung has been reading these cases. Obviously, he's working with this guy, Roland Hazard, and he's probably noticing, hey, this guy thinks he's going to stay sober. Doesn't look like he is. He hasn't had a personality change or an emotional rearrangement yet. And as a result, he's going to leave my hospital and he's going to go get drunk. Dr. Jung probably saw all of that coming. Roland Hazard thought, on the other hand, relapse is unthinkable. Man, I'm doing great, Doc. Well, turns out the doctor was right, and the doctor was prepared with what to share with him. So then Roland, as most of us do, think, well, okay, I'll get back in church. After all, I've been a good church member all my life. The doctor tells him, "No, well, that's really good, and I'm glad you go to church, buddy. And I'm glad, you've done all you have over at your church. That does not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience." Now, on what I've just shared with you so far covers a lot of ground. It tells us about our own personalities, doesn't it? Because that's exactly how we're going to do this. If we don't take it to the next level, which is exactly what Roland did here. We're going to have to take it to the next level. We're going to have to realize that, one, that I'm not going to sober up on my new resolve and making up my mind to stay sober. That's not going to happen. I'm going to have to recognize that me getting back on my feet again and getting a great job and making $100,000, $200,000 a year is not going to mean jack squat when I'm out there sticking a needle in my arm again and my boss is calling me into his office telling me today's your last day. It's not going to mean anything if I stay sober for 5 years and I've got me a good wife, got me a couple of kids, I got me a big house over on Lake Nazareth. I've got me another house down in Austin. And I've got good business or a great job. And then I do the relapse. Because guess what? All I've done is make it that much more painful. Because there goes the wife with the kids, the house in San Angelo, the house in Austin. It's a pretty big fall. So I might as well not even get up off the ground if I'm going to fall again. Because it's a lot easier from here to hit the ground than from up here. So there's no point in doing this. There's no point in stopping drinking unless we're going to do this and do it right. So that's going to take us to our new topic. Keep in mind what we've been talking about here. About Roland Hazard and how he probably had a better life than any of us are ever going to have. It is hard to become the owner of a company like the Honeywell Corporation. But you never know. One of us might get fortunate and have such a big multi-billion-dollar enterprise. So, who knows? Maybe I'll apply for a job at your company. We're going to look at a little bit of information here. Some of you have seen this before. Some of you have not. First thing I'm going to cover is the nature of the disease. I didn't pass out these papers because most of you already have one. You'll notice there's a little chart up on the board here. Get out of the way. That chart matches up with the chart that's on the back of this first document that's entitled The Genetics of Alcohol and Other Drug Dependence. I'm going to read this first summary at the top of this page. And as I said, it's entitled The Genetics of Alcohol and Other Drug Dependence. It's a relatively recent research paper. It's compiled now that we've been able to do the Human Genome Project and the HapMap project. We've been able to trace down an enormous amount of genetic information regarding alcoholism and other drug use. It begins, alcohol dependence and dependence on other drugs frequently co-occur, and strong evidence suggests that both disorders are at least in part influenced by genetic factors. Indeed, studies using twins suggest that the overlap between dependence on alcohol and other drugs largely results from shared genetic factors. This common genetic liability, which also extends to antisocial behavior, has been conceptualized as a general predisposition towards a variety of forms of psychopathology, characterized by disinhibited behavior, i.e., externalizing psychopathology. Accordingly, many of the genetic factors affecting risk for dependence on alcohol and other drugs appear to act through a general externalizing factor. However, other genetic factors appear to be specific to a certain disorder. In recent years, researchers have identified numerous genes as affecting risk for dependence on alcohol and other drugs. These include genes involved in alcohol metabolism, as well as the transmission of nerve cell signals and modulation of nerve cell activity, i.e., aminobutyric acid and acetylcholinergic neurotransmission and endogenous opioid and cannabinoid systems. Now, those are a lot of big words to explain a real simple thing. But when you're born, if you'll look at the board here, you have some genes that you're born with. At the top of that little chart, whether you're looking at it on your papers or looking at the board, that series of genes is going to manifest with a propensity to use alcohol, a propensity to use drugs, conduct disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. For those of you not familiar with what antisocial personality disorder is, because it sounds like we don't like to hang out with people, right? I don't want to be social. It doesn't mean that. Most antisocial personalities have lots of friends. The difference is they see their friends as a resource, not as a human being in need of care, love, and attention. You're a resource to me if I've got antisocial personality disorder. Actually, I'm probably going to be incapable of even understanding that everyone on earth doesn't look at people this way. But really, most people don't. Most people don't look at other people as resources. In fact, what we find is that 85% of the people don't have this condition. They do not have these genes. 15% of the people do. If you fall into that 15% category, you've never had the same kind of thoughts that a normal person does. All your life, you have looked at human beings as resources. You've looked at them as a means to get what you want for your own gratification. This dates back to when you were 2 years old and onward. This, of course, leads to a lot of this conduct disorder and so forth. It does create problems with personal relationships. It does cause misery and depression. It gives us a sense of feeling useless. We can't be of real help to other people because obviously we're not out to help people. We're out to get what we want. So as a result, we have an enormous amount of trouble. Well, it's usually not long before looking at life from that perspective that we get pretty dissatisfied and pretty miserable. So in most cases, not always, somewhere in the teenage years or the early 20s, we discover a way of treating our miserable condition. And that is with drugs and or alcohol. So we're going to look at the book a little bit here. Let's jump over to page 52. Okay. Right about the, second paragraph, it says, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. Now, the preceding page, just kind of to bring you up to par on this, the preceding page is talking about how we have a readiness to change. If we have a gadget or something that doesn't work, how ready we are to change to something that does work. And it's asking us here why we shouldn't have that same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. And I'll stop there. You get the idea. This is what I was sharing with you a moment ago. After about 15, 20 years of doing that, from childhood, getting close to adulthood, we're pretty miserable. And we think everybody on earth feels that way. Actually, 85% of the population doesn't. They're not experiencing those feelings. And therefore, they don't need anything to anesthetize their misery. Now, of course, we don't realize it. We're trying to cut up and joke. We've been working a long time to try to not be miserable. A lot of us have become, class clowns. A lot of us have engaged in being able to say the funny jokes and cut up with the crowd. We're doing everything we can. We've been working for 15 to 20 years to get away from our miserable state of existence. And problem is we think the whole world feels that way. Again, it's not true. 85% of the people really aren't having those feelings. They're not experiencing that misery and depression. They're not having the trouble with personal relationships that we are. They're not feeling useless because, they're not looking at everyone as a resource. So I know I'm belaboring that a little bit, but it's so critical to understand what happens. Now, we're predisposed to use these drugs and alcohol, and another set of genes, if you'll notice on your little paper, come into play here. And those genes are going to tell you whether you're the guy who really likes opiates or you're the guy who likes methamphetamine. If you really like methamphetamine, you got some genes that are telling you that's the one that I like. Whereas if you're the guy who's doing heroin, you've got some genes telling you that's the one I like. Or if it's alcohol. So we're going to look at another piece of paper that's in front of you. And I'm not going to read the whole paper here, but and I'm not expecting you to remember all this genetic stuff. And what we're really trying to do is just make a clear point that we're very different than other people. Under the heading here, well, it's not the heading, but where it says physical, we'll just read this real quick. Excuse me. The genetic factors in addictions. Not that the average reader will know these genetic differences, but the following illustrates alcoholics and addicts are very different than other people. The following shows just some of the research completed thus far on methamphetamine and alcohol. Similar studies exist for many other mood-altering substances. For meth alone, there are currently 38 studies examining 39 genes, of which 18 were found to have significant genotypic, allelic, and haplotypic association with methamphetamine use disorders. 3 genes, I'm not going to read off the letters and numbers here, were associated with methamphetamine abuse. 9 with methamphetamine dependence, and 2 with methamphetamine abuse and dependence, and 4 with meth psychosis. It goes on to say for alcohol here, it says for alcohol it is mediated through the
cornucopia.
Could give me a moment here. Corticomesolimbic, dopaminergic reward pathway. Those are some large words. But anyway, and again, that's not the whole point of why we're learning the information. It's not to get where we've memorized all the genetic names and so forth, or the systems that process this. But just to absolutely understand that what was known and observed by those doctors in 1935, we have completely substantiated down to what chromosome and genetic marker. They can test the fluid of an unborn baby and say this child will be a methamphetamine addict. So the concept that we do methamphetamine because we want to, or that we drink because it's what we like to do, that absolutely just has to be thrown out the window. We never had a choice. Before we were ever born, there's a doctor out there that equipped with this ability to test you that could have said exactly what your life was going to consist of up to this point. I mean, it might have had a few variables, but he could have said, well, based on the genetics, this child is going to go to jail several times. They're going to break your heart. They're going to steal your money. They're not going to be faithful or loyal to anyone. They're going to be arrogant, rude, and they're going to think they're smarter than everyone else. And this is before you're born. So the idea that we have orchestrated our life is absolute rubbish. It's just rubbish. We've ended up where we're at because of a serious physical condition and a mental illness. So I think you guys got the idea here. You'll notice also that many of these genetics will overlap. So if I'm out of methamphetamine long enough, because I like methamphetamine real well, I'll use some other drugs. And I like alcohol really good too. What? That never happened. No, if I'm out of whatever I've got, I will find something to change the way I feel. So this concept that there's alcoholics that are pure alcoholics and then there are drug addicts that are pure drug addicts and that we need more than one program. Not really. What we need is to understand what the solution is. We also need to understand what the problem is. We're going to talk a little bit more about this antisocial personality disorder. Some of the milder sides of that disease are just not keeping commitments. For example, if I sign a contract with someone to pay a bill, or I agree with a friend that, hey man, I'll get you back on Tuesday on that, and then I don't do it, that is a psychopathic behavior or an antisocial behavior, because socially I've agreed with them. I made a commitment to pay you back. And then I decide, for whatever reason, I don't need to pay you back. That's a psychopathic condition. Now, most of us, when we think of a psychopath, we think of somebody with a big butcher knife behind the bushes late at night with the thick glasses that's sneaking into the house. Right? Psycho. But no, most psychopaths are just people that are very similar to you and I. We're the kind of people that I'll borrow some money from you on a Wednesday, tell you I'm going to pay you back on Monday, and then when you call me to see if you can get paid back, I'm like, what are you calling me so quick for? It's not even noon yet. Yeah, I said I'd pay you back Monday, but come on, dude. That's my attitude. Now, what really happened is on Wednesday, I told you I was going to pay you back Monday. So that's the kind of things that the psychopathic person does. So we've got a serious mental illness here. It's not going to go away just because we get rid of drugs. Because if you'll notice, I'm going to erase this portion of the chart. If you just take away the drugs and alcohol, you've still got the same condition that led you to use drugs and alcohol in the first place. Because the reason we turned to those drugs and alcohol is life became unbearable. It became miserable. We're going to look at a little bit of this information here. When we look at page 28 of the doctor's opinion in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I say page 28, it's Roman numeral 28. I'm just going to read a small portion in the essence of time. It says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomena of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So we have a genetic condition that makes it so we have a craving that never occurs in normal people. Now flip over to page XXX, or Roman numeral 30. And it says, the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We're all familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon for keeps. They're over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. Okay. Have you ever tried to quit using drugs on your own before? Okay. If you have, and then you found you started back up, especially if this has happened a couple of times, then you fit this category. What that means is, just like Dr. William Silkworth in the Big Book was talking about, you're a psychopath. That means there's a serious mental disorder that has to be dealt with. Now, you've got to be honest with yourself. We all know that. You got to be honest and say, yeah, I really tried to quit on such and such occasion, and then on this other occasion, I really meant business, and it didn't work. Well, that means you fit in that category. That means you got these genes, and that means you're in for a life of absolute misery and hell unless this disease is treated effectively. You're probably not going to get lucky enough to die from the disease, though some of us do. You're probably going to end up with, like what's on this board here, you're going to get to live with long-term suffering. That means a long time, 10, 20, maybe even 40 years of just absolute miserable life. The building a new life, getting the new wife, getting the fancy cars, and then burning it to the ground over and over and over. Just like I said earlier, when the doctor could take that fluid sample from an unborn baby and predict what your life is, we can do the same thing right now. Right now, we can predict what the next 15, 20, 30 years. Now, sad thing with us alcoholics is we say, my case is different. My case is different.
I'm special.
I'm special. Yeah.
People think-
I'm going to outsmart this thing. I'm going to outsmart this disease. We've all, have any of you guys done that?
Yes.
Yeah, we all have. Because we all think we're smarter. And I'll tell you, in this room alone, if some of you only knew what your IQs were, you'd be amazed at the intelligence that's sitting in this room. You are smart. That's not going to make it any easier to deal with this disease. In fact, it's an absolute liability when it comes to you not having that long-term suffering. Be much better off if all of us were just more normal IQs.
But that's low, man.
Well, we don't know what it's like because we're not there. But I will tell you this. The higher IQ tends to make us try to overthink things. So, and this is actually about getting past the psychopathic condition. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We did hear about that personality or emotional rearrangement that was being discussed by Dr. Jung earlier with Roland Hazard. You remember that? A complete emotional rearrangement is what's required. Now I want you to jump over to page 567. If you got the little book, it's in the back of the little book, just before where you'll see it's entitled the original manuscript, but just towards the rear of this book. It says, I'm not going to read the whole page again in the essence of time. But it says, among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. He's talking about an immediate spiritual experience where you have some profound bright light shining or something like that. These are frequent, but they're not the rule. It says, most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could have hardly been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. If you'll notice also at the top of this document entitled Spiritual Experience, it gives a number of names for this spiritual awakening and so forth. I'm going to read a few of those. It says, upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. So we're talking about a personality change. They also refer to it as a religious experience and a spiritual awakening. It goes on to say in the next paragraph, yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. They don't have to be sudden. They don't have to be spectacular. They do have to happen, though. If you think for a moment that we can just quit using drugs and life is going to get better, that's a delusion. That is part of the mental illness. And we all suffer from it. I could start suffering from it right now with 15 and a half years sober. I could start saying, well, I got this thing. And you probably find that it's not long before you'll be talking about, oh, poor John. That dude's out there doing dope again. Or maybe visiting my funeral, you know, if you decided to come. But it would not be pretty. So this concept that it's all about drugs, we of course have to eliminate that. So we've covered these pages. We understand that a personality change is going to be necessary. I'm going to kind of wrap this thing up here in the next few minutes with this, that the person that we were before we ever used drugs the first time was a sick alcoholic. Because, see, we were on the path to using drugs that first time. It was just a matter of time. Our mind, our mental conditioning, our spiritual conditioning was headed one direction, and that is towards those drugs and alcohol. Now, we may have arrived there with slightly different circumstances. One of us may have been getting a beer for our dad, took a big old drink. Next one might have met some friends and hanging out with the girls, and next thing you know, we learned what playing quarters was about. And next one might have just had a buddy that came over and gave us a shot of dope. But whatever the case was, and however we got there, really doesn't matter. Fact is we were working on getting there from the time we were born. It was just a matter of time till we ran into the substance. We're like freeze-dried alcoholic. Just add alcohol. Just add dope. So, we're ready. We're ready. So the concept that we've been in control of our life at all, is despite all the rebellion, all the hard time we gave our parents and our teachers, thinking that we're getting our way, guess what? None of that was actually us. It was our disease. So what that means, in the final analysis, I have to treat the disease. Now, does anybody in here feel brave enough to tell me, how do we treat this disease?
We smoke a cigarette.
Some of us do. Does anybody know?
From a spiritual awakening, getting to steps.
10, working the steps, 10, 11, or 12 every day.
Well, really, we're incapable of treating it ourselves. We have to find a power greater than ourselves to do that for us. That one is God.
Good stuff. Well, there's a couple of things, and we're going to be covering it this week. Number one is relinquishing our worship of material things. The concept that if I manipulate the material world, that somehow my emotions are going to get better inside. That's the first thing. That's the personality that has to change. I absolutely have to eliminate that. Now, we can have a lot of nice things. I mean, you guys can become billionaires. There's nothing wrong with that. But to have even a shred of belief that your emotional condition or / spiritual condition is going to be bettered by whether you have a Bentley and a big house or whatever it is, whatever your delusions are there, that has to be gotten rid of, because manipulating the material world will not help us spiritually. It will not help us emotionally. There are plenty of people that have Bentleys right now that are ready to drive them off a cliff. Especially if they're like us. They fall into that 15% category. So it's the attitude, and we write about that certain simple attitude on the top of page 27. That attitude that when I can manipulate my material world well enough, then my spiritual world will take care of itself, right? That's what we've been taught all our life too, by the way. You didn't really sign up for that. That's just what you've been programmed to think. So people can sell you stuff. We live in a capitalist commercial world, and it's great. I love living here. But you've been programmed that if you buy enough crap and go on enough trips and do enough of this, that, and the other, that your spirit's going to take care of itself. Well, Nothing could be further from the truth. The way we do this is get past all that worship of the material. We get that, we mature. We get mature enough to realize that's not going to work. We deal with the emotional and spiritual side of life where I no longer experience resentment. And if I do, it's very brief and I deal with it using a certain plan. I no longer experience anger. If I do, it's very, very brief. And I've got a program in here, which again, we'll cover it throughout the week, on how to deal with that. And as a result, I begin to get to where I can control my emotional nature. Once I get to where I can control my emotional nature, guess what? It becomes a lot easier to have a relationship, right? Because I'm not getting pissed off at my wife. I'm not being mean and abusive to my kids. I'm not yelling at my boss and getting fired or running my employees off because I'm a dominant tyrant. Well, so the material just automatically follows getting that emotional or spiritual side of it taken care of. So that's what we're going to be working on this week. And the only thing that you really have to soak in from this meeting is, if you've experienced a craving for alcohol or a craving for drugs after you've put the chemical in your system, listen closely. If you put the chemical in your system, and like with alcohol, you want another drink right away, or like with meth, when you start coming down, you want another bump. If you've experienced that, then you've got these genes that make you allergic. If you've ever tried to quit and stop and you couldn't stay stopped, then you've got an obsession. That means you've got this disease. If you've got this disease, then it has to be treated, and it's going to take a lot more than just getting off dope to treat it. And we'll get into that, of course, throughout this week as well. So, with that being said, let's wrap it up with the Lord's Prayer. We should kind of reach around the table here. We've got such a large number of people.
Sorry. The carpet.
Who lets the miracle happen?
Our
Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Keep coming back. It works when you work it. All right. We're going to just read a little bit about his business life. Roland Hazard served on the Rhode Island State Senate. He was known as Roland Hazard III. He was primarily a businessman throughout his career. His father and family owned the Peacedale Manufacturing Company until its sale to M.T. Stevens & Son in 1918. He was also involved in the Solvay Process Company and the Cement Solvay Company. Later became the owner of Allied Chemical and Dye Corporation. It later, most recently, and I'm going to summarize here, merged with the Honeywell Corporation. And if I were to list all the many things, it would take up almost the entire meeting to list this man's career. Now, as you probably know, the Honeywell Corporation is a multi-billion-dollar corporation today. Roland Hazard was never going to face a day without plenty of money. Not only was he going to have all the money he needed throughout his lifetime, generations and cousins and so forth in that family are multimillionaires to this day. Now, what's significant about that? We're going to read a little bit about Roland Hazard in just a second. And we're going to find a little bit more about how he played a role in Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you'll join me on page 26 of the book entitled Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to read a little bit about that. On page 26, it begins by saying, a certain American businessman, and we are talking about Roland Hazard here, had ability, good sense, and high character. For years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrist. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself under the care of the celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Jung, who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So he returned to the doctor, or to this doctor, whom he admired, and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. In the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society and would have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. That was the great physician's opinion. But this man still lives and is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on earth where other free men may go without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed in on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are a phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods which I have employed are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description." Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected, after all, he was a good church member. His hope, however, was destroyed by the doctors telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case, they did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. As I mentioned a moment ago about Roland Hazard, one of the wealthiest men in the United States. I mean, he's a senator, too. I mean, he can go anywhere in the world. He's talked to all the best American psychiatrists. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what a psychiatrist is, it's somebody that has a MD, a medical doctor, that also has an enormous amount of psychological training on top of that. A psychiatrist is somebody who knows medicine and psychology. He's went to the best because he can afford that. He lives in New York and Vermont, all those fancy houses and everything he has. And he's going to various places, taking time and treatment with the best in the country. That's not working. So he finally gets at a point that he says, I'll go to the best in the world. Dr. Carl Gustav Jung. Jung is to psychology and psychiatry in the same brackets as the great men, kind of like what Einstein or Feynman would be to physics. He's certainly at the top ranks. To this day, we have many of our psychological and psychiatric evaluations that are based on what Jung discovered back in the days that he was practicing. So he goes to Dr. Jung and he stays 1 year in treatment. He's actually in a facility. Dr. Jung is working with him on an ongoing basis. I don't know whether it's daily or every couple of days, but I'm sure it's pretty regularly, just like anybody's physician would keep an eye on them. If you'll notice, Roland is feeling unusually confident. It tells us that he was skeptical in the beginning because he'd been to all those other psychiatrists. But now he's like, well, I've been to the best. I've been here a year. I haven't had a drink. I haven't had a drug in a year. In fact, he goes on to say that he thinks that relapse is unthinkable. You pause and look at that word. It's unthinkable. He's leaving the facility, and it's unthinkable that he's going to relapse. He gets on the train to head to France, where he's going to catch another train to head out to the boat, come back to America. Now, it's said that somewhere very early, he has a relapse. Many people say that happened on his train to France. We don't know the exact minute, but we know he had a relapse within a very short period of leaving the doctor's care after being sober for a year.
I mean, he obviously didn't go on the boat.
He didn't make the boat. I don't believe that happened. So he returns to the doctor. He says, hey, what's going on here, man? I've come to the best doctor in the world. I want to be free of alcoholism. And the doctor says, in my opinion, you're utterly what?
Hopeless.
Hopeless. You're utterly hopeless. If you put yourself in Roland's shoes, that's a pretty sad place right there. That all the money and everything that it can buy looks like you're going to die an alcoholic death. You're going to either have to hire a bodyguard or incarcerate yourself, basically. So that's making a couple of points here. And, I don't mean to belabor these points, but it's making a couple of points that if you have money and you're an alcoholic, you're going to be just as unhappy as if you were broke, and maybe worse. Because you really have something to live for, and you can't figure out why you can't function without getting up in the morning and do a shot of dope or taking a drink. And, we all know that money's real fun for a couple of months, right? I mean, I'm sure all of you have had, a pretty good supply at some point. But at some point, it runs out. And I don't care how wild you get with money. The happiness, the fun, the ability to blot out our miserable existence runs out. Well, it sounds like where Roland was at. His ability to blot out that miserable existence that he's living is just gone. Well, it also tells us that the doctor says, I've never seen one single case recover. In the great physician's opinion and his observation, people like you don't recover. He was asked, though, by Roland Hazard, is there no exception? The doctor said, yes, there are. There are exceptions to cases such as yours. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. Where did he get that information?
William D. Steele, so forth. Varieties of